Tonight on the Worldview Weekend Hour, the Muslim Brotherhood, in their Muslim Brotherhood explanatory memorandum, said they would get Americans to destroy their own miserable house by their own hands. Well, now apparently not just Americans, but evangelical Americans are helping to do that by having interfaith dialogue with proponents of Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, CARE, people tied to terrorist organizations. Where? On America's what was once premier evangelical colleges and universities. The Worldview Weekend Hour begins right now.
WVW-TV presents the Worldview Weekend Hour with Brannon and Howse. Whether the topic is law, science, government, economics, history, family, social issues, education, or theology, Brannon brings the issues of today into clear focus through the lens of a biblical worldview. And now, here is your host, Brannon Howse.
Welcome to the program. Glad you're with us. Tom Littleton joins us in studio tonight. Tom, welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you.
Tom, we talked about in our last broadcast the AND campaign, biblical values and social justice. And we found out that a big part of that was third way, taking opposites and merging them and coming up with a third option or a synthesis of ideas, opposite ideas, thesis and antithesis, merge them for a third way, but it's always moving the ball down to the left. So they were really big, those involved in the AND campaign, which is nothing more than Black Lives Matter repackaged for the evangelical world, I believe. We saw that they're big into third way. Now we're going to talk about a group called Neighborly Faith, and they're big into third way. Here's the headline coming from one publication. It says, Neighborly Faith urges evangelicals to find a third way to befriend Muslims, coming from Religion News. So that third way concept or idea is very, very popular. And what we're finding is that this is going on Christian colleges and universities all throughout America. Let's start out by naming, because I think that will shock much of our listening audience, naming some of the once very trusted evangelical colleges and universities that are involved in Neighborly Faith.
Well, the event that you just reported on then from Religion News Service, that was at Wheaton, and this was in the department with the Billy Graham chair of evangelism. So that's, of course, at Billy Graham's alma mater, Wheaton, no more trusted, at one time, conservative institution. Another is Moody Bible Institute, one of the founders of this Neighborly Faith, one of the co-leaders of it. It actually develops curriculum for Moody Bible Institute. And so we see people from Cedarville, from university, also from Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is Danny Aiken's school in Wake Forest. We also see Fuller. Of course, Fuller's in every bit of this stuff. Everywhere we go with this progressive movement, we find Fuller there. So Moody and Wheaton, I would say, would be a big shock, just given
Cedarville?
their historic names, Cedarville, and also with the head of the Christian colleges, Council of Christian Colleges and Universities being involved. I would say it's a pretty good indicator that this is becoming standard fare for Christian universities to welcome this interfaith dialogue and this event. It is student-driven, it is campus-driven, and so this is a focus on literally to bring Christians and Muslims together. That's the stated purpose.
But some would say, but Tom, the idea is to expose kids to things and ideas on a college campus or university. And so what's wrong with having a Muslim there debating them?
Well, as we'll look into some of the Muslims who are there, first off, it's not a debate.
Exactly.
It's a big get-along, come together, get along, and learn about one another, accept one another as they are. Even some of the front end of the narrative is that it's evangelistic, but then we find out it's not evangelistic at all. That's what they said in this event, don't treat Muslims as a project. That evangelicals just need to get over their phobia, their fear of Muslims or negative attitudes toward them, and just learn to all get along. So it's a lot of propaganda, and of course interfaith dialogue, we've seen the manifestations of it in many ways across the evangelical spectrum, but this one being a campus-focused event, and of course I don't see that the Christians are being invited onto the Muslim campuses. It's the Muslims being invited on the Christian campuses.
Mm-hmm. And when we started exposing interfaith dialogue really hard in June of 2017, after discovering that neo-Calvinist James White had come to the Mid-South here in the Memphis area where I live and where our studio is based to carry out an interfaith dialogue with a Jew-hating, Holocaust-denying, Hitler-defending, jihadi preaching imam, Yasser Qadi, with Muslim Brotherhood, who's with Muslim Brotherhood and a Sharia law expert, or a Sharia expert, you should say, because you say Sharia law, you're really saying law. So he's a Sharia expert. We said, hey, this is going to open the floodgates for evangelicals. And James White defended it. He would not back down from sitting there claiming the sense of kindred spirit with this Jew-hating, Holocaust-denying, Hitler-defending, jihadi preaching imam. He wanted him to make a video to show the church the true face of Islam. And he said we could partner together and defend each other. As secularism grows, Muslims and Christians can hold hands together. Yeah, that's just stupid. But we said the response to James White should have been a repudiation. But no, major evangelicals and Christian conferences and Bible teachers and seminaries continue to embrace James White. And this is coming from the so-called ultra-conservative crowd of the neo-Calvinist, which we've learned to find out they're not conservative at all. But then again, they have a false gospel, many of them, and they're pushing social justice and dominion theology and a really messed up eschatology. So we predicted in June of 2017 with Usama Dak and Shahram Hadian that if this is going to be accepted, and what James White did with a radical like Yasser Qadi is not going to be repudiated, it will open the floodgates, and this will become a standard accepted thing within evangelicalism. And now here we are filming in December 10th, 2019, and now it is accepted.
Yes, it's accepted, it's mainstreamed, and it's considered something of necessity, really, if you're going to be a compassionate Christian, if you're going to be engaging the culture, if you're going to have the right kind of posture. If you look at this biblically, it's heretical to say that Christians need to interfaith with followers of other gods. And if you look at it in the Old Testament, they were actually told not to inquire about their gods or how they worship them. They were strictly forbidden to intermarry or to have any kind of relationship or inquisition about those or curiosity about those other gods and religions, because in fact they were thrown out of their land. Those inhabitants were, because of their idolatry, and they were brought under the judgment of God. Paul stood in Athens, a center of many gods, and he rebuked them, and he said, God at this point commands men everywhere to repent. So the time when God would be tolerant of other religions has really never existed. That's always been a snare and a problem for Christians. So in fact, we're seeing Christians being lured into the very snare that they would think that there's common ground, that there's common language, common word between Christians and other religions, in particular Islam.
Yeah, and then we know that 2 Corinthians 6:14-17 says you cannot mix truth and error, light and darkness. To do not do this. Do not be involved in spiritual enterprises with these unbelievers. Now, that's different. Go to a ball game, have them to your house for dinner, be involved in a public policy event. That's different from a spiritual event on a Christian college campus where we're trying to have interfaith or bring together the idea that we can somehow find common ground with our faith traditions. That's not, again, 2 Corinthians 6:14-17 says you can't do this. We also know Romans 16:17 tells us to mark those who cause division doctrinally and avoid them. And of course, we know that they have a different Jesus. They have a blasphemous religious system that disregards the Trinity and the resurrection of Christ, the crucifixion, death, burial, resurrection of Christ, and the character that shows up in the Quran. Isa is not the Jesus of the Bible. So this is a real problem, but it's occurring on your college campuses and universities. Now again, Muslim Brotherhood in their Muslim Brotherhood Explanatorium, which was discovered in the early 2000s in the basement of a jihadi. He had a sub-basement of some 80 banker boxes, and in there the FBI found the Muslim Brotherhood Explanatorium, which said they would get Americans to destroy their own miserable house with their own hands. And here's an example where now the evangelical Christian institutions have been co-opted, and they're going to now help Islam destroy our country. Because as we're going to see and show you a lot of slides, most of those involved in this are part of Muslim Brotherhood. They're part of Hamas. They're part of CARE. This is a group, Muslim Brotherhood, as we've done many shows on, goes all the way back to Adolf Hitler and the Grand Mufti of Palestine, al-Husseini, who, according to the Nuremberg trials, helped orchestrate and was an architect of the final solution, the murder of 6 million Jews, 5 million non-Jews, and that's Muslim Brotherhood. And so they've openly talked about bringing down, destroying America and getting Americans to do it. And here it is occurring on college campuses. Look at this from their Neighborly Faith website. America's most significant Muslim leaders are introducing themselves to evangelicals. Then they say that the trusted platform for bringing evangelicals and Muslims together is the Neighborly Faith. And we see that the co-director of this Chris Stackeruk, look at what it says there highlighted. He develops online curriculum for Moody Bible Institute. Now that's shocking. I'm 50 years old. I grew up with Moody Monthly showing up in my home every month. I had the opportunity to speak at Moody Bible Institute in their chapel in the early 90s. And I was a guest occasionally on Moody Bible Radio Network. I spoke at a conference and had a great time of ministry at a church one weekend with George Sweeting in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. So I grew up having great respect for Moody Bible Institute, Moody Monthly, their publishing division. And would you have ever dreamed, my friends, that Moody Bible Institute would be pushing social justice, which we find again and again, and now they're pushing interfaith dialogue with known jihadis. And yet the Muslim Brotherhood scholar, who's now deceased, the Muslim Brotherhood scholar Syed Qutb, said that interfaith dialogue was a bridge to bring the non-Muslim to their side, not the other way around. And so it is a tactic of Muslim Brotherhood, and they're caving to it, and their co-director is on staff with Moody Bible Institute. This is going to be very shocking and very disturbing to our listeners, our viewers. One lady called into the show today, live on radio, and she said, I feel like I'm living in an alternate universe to hear this happening, right?
Right. Right, and to see institutions where people have been sending their children, their grown children, to get a good Christian education. In fact, they're getting progressive politics, which we're showing, and they're getting this kind of movement that will actually weaken the opportunity for the Christian freedom and religious freedom in our country to be protected, and then welcome more Islamists. One of the realities is here too that coupled with this interfaith dialogue is a big push for immigration reform. And so what this means is more Muslims, and then we have speakers who
amnesty.
Yes. And we're talking about refugee resettlement, and then Christians actually being called to fight for the right for more mosques to be built and so forth. We're seeing that with the ERLC and religious leaders like Russell Moore and at the time the head of the International Mission Board, David Platt, as they intervened for a mosque to be built in a neighborhood in New Jersey. So, and Murfreesboro, Tennessee, that was a famous case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. So the problem here is that we're actually seeing Christians being commissioned and enlisted to help spread the Islamic religion.
Absolutely.
And so how can that be twisted believably into a gospel cause? Well, only through propaganda, through a massive propaganda campaign. I mean, honestly, this Neighborly Faith thing, when I started reading the website and saw some of the Christian side of it that were there, I thought, this is probably the flimsiest narrative that I've seen yet. It's just open, affinity with a false religion and with something antithetical to the Christian faith.
And people that have openly stated, as we're going to see, that want Sharia, which means the end of our constitutional republic.
Right.
They want Sharia in America. And you use the word propaganda. This is brainwashing these kids. Our whole series on brainwashing, information operation, information warfare. The key word here is propaganda, revisionist history. It is twisting facts, distorting facts, deception, lies. Political correctness is used. They set up a narrative. You're a racist or a bigot or Islamophobic, if you don't agree to this. Islamophobia created by the Muslim Brotherhood in the International Institute of Islamic Thought in the early 90s, Muslim Brotherhood group, that said that if you are concerned about Islam, and speak truth about Islam, really, you're Islamophobic. You have a phobia, an unreasonable fear or phobia. You're crazy. So again, just as the progressive Marxists have set up with inside evangelicalism, prove you're not a racist by buying into social justice. Prove you're not a racist by agreeing to push the idea of open borders and open society. Now they set up a narrative. Prove you're not an Islamophobic and crazy by agreeing for Muslims to come into the country and give them all amnesty, and then, by the way, merge your Christian beliefs with Islam through Chrislam or interfaith dialogue. And if you don't, all of these narratives are being set up to prove you're a racist, bigot, fascist, etc. Correct?
Right. And the irony here, too, is that it wasn't Baptists who blew up the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. This is coming less than 2 decades after September 11th, where Islamic terrorists brought down 2 icons in New York City, and the icon of our own defense made a huge hole in it in the Pentagon, and people that I knew died in New York in that event. And
you were in the building?
I was in the building in World Trade Center Tower 1 just 2 weeks prior. I had friends who worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, but it was, the cries that went out of the cockpit of those hijacked planes was Allah Akbar, right? And so we're kidding ourselves that we're not susceptible to propaganda. If something like this can prosper and be believed and accepted within the evangelical community on our own shores, of course, when just after September 11th, even CNN was reporting on the Taliban, the terrors of the Taliban in Afghanistan. I remember seeing a hidden camera report where they were executing people in the soccer fields there. Well, CNN would never show that today. Under the Obama administration, we see the inability to even use the word terrorist. And so now, within less than 2 decades, we see the church opening wide its doors and welcoming Islam in. Now, I would say that is a very successful brainwashing and propaganda campaign.
And fast.
Yes.
I mean, if on the day of 9/11, 2001, we had said major Bible colleges and institutions and universities will be embracing and bringing in to speak to their students jihadis, and describe it as the Christian thing to do, we would have said, you're crazy. That'll never happen after 9/11. And yet here we are, December 2019, reporting that it is indeed happening. And the sad reality is I believe we're headed for a much bigger terrorist attack than 9/11. Because of our immigration problem. And 8 years of Obama allowed the battlefield to be prepared. And we know, for a matter of fact, as we've already documented in our movie Siege, you can watch the trailer in 67 minutes for free at siegethemovie.com. We interview former FBI, former CIA, former DHS, former KGB, the former staffer, National Security Council staffer for President Trump in the White House, Rich Higgins, a lot of experts. It's 8 hours and 22 minutes. You can watch 67 minutes of it for free at siegethemovie.com, siegethemovie.com. And we interview one former CIA operations officer who is sat at this desk, Claire Lopez, who explains how our immigration problem, that we're not fixing our immigration problem, allowed for 9/11 because it allowed the hijackers to be trained in Iran on flight simulators in Iran. Their passports were not stamped. They moved back into Saudi Arabia, from Saudi Arabia into America. And because our folks didn't know what to look for and how to vet these people, they got here and were able to hijack those planes. This all comes down, 9/11 largely comes down to immigration issue. Yet Neighborly Faith is really to give the narrative that Donald Trump has been a racist and a xenophobic person by wanting to vet Islamists from other nations, particularly nations with terror ties. So now you have the so-called evangelicals being penetrated. I've told the story and I'll tell it again. Sitting at my dinner table, I had a former CIA operations officer on my right and one on my left. And we were discussing my book, Marxianity, and how Marxism and Christianity are being merged. We're talking about interfaith dialogue and really how evangelicals are becoming one of the greatest threats to America because it is a powerful power center. Look at the margin of victory for many, many presidents. It has been the evangelical vote. And same goes with members of the House or Senate or your state legislature or your governor's mansion. Evangelicals have been in many cases the margin of victory. And so they're powerful in putting people into office, and they must be penetrated and flipped. And I prove in Marxianity and in the documovie Siege that this is what's going on in part. One of the power centers being penetrated. In our series and documentary on brainwashing, they're going after education, religion, and media. Education, religion, and media, and government. These are your power centers. And so religion is a target. And what we see is that now these religious institutions are being used to say, if you believe in vetting people, if you believe in a strong national security, now you're a bigot, you're a racist. So they're helping to push the narrative. And one on my right, one on my left, former CIA said, Brannon, and these are not evangelicals. They would not describe themselves as evangelicals. They said, you must keep reaching the evangelicals. If they buy into Marxism, if they buy into this interfaith dialogue, if they buy into the idea that we can find common ground with these Islamist jihadis and Marxists and the red-green axis, the country's gone. they are the last line of defense. In fact, one of them said, we know for a fact, Muslim Brotherhood has boasted that the last line of defense they have to penetrate are evangelical Christians. Once they penetrate evangelical Christians, they have penetrated every power center in America. Well, we know they've penetrated our State Department, our FBI, our CIA, our Congress, the White House at many levels for the last few presidents. We know they've penetrated the media. We know they've penetrated education. We know that Islam is being funded by the Federal Department of Education, as we deal with in our documovie Sabotage. It's sabotagethemovie.com. And so what we're showing is they really have penetrated all the other power centers. And if evangelicals is the last group they have to penetrate, both of my former CIA operations officer friends said that's a problem, because if any group of people should understand this and fight it and preserve our Judeo-Christian constitutional founding, it would be the evangelical Christians. Well, clearly we're losing if this is now accepted onto major evangelical Christian colleges and universities.
Yeah, and you have to ask where we're going to be in 5 years from now. And obviously they're training a whole generation of young Christians, bringing them up in this, basically washed in this interfaith dialogue. And you would have to be a universalist. You couldn't be a true Christian to accept this stuff. And that's the spirit of the age that's behind it, and where there are many ways, many paths. And you know, the problem with most non-Christians is that Christianity is exclusive. But you know, that exclusivity comes from the very nature of who Jesus is, and his very own word. If we're taking him at his word, then this is not something that Christians can do to help Islamists be able to exercise their religious freedom and then to basically compete for souls on American soil. That's what's happening. But they're competing for souls right there in our own Christian institutions. Now, you'll also see World Relief and World Vision have leaders involved in this neighborly faith. And that's a little clue. Those people who are scratching their head, wondering what's happening, how this is happening, I can tell you there's a lot of money in the mix. And these organizations, international aid organizations like World Relief and World Vision, they're getting money to bring in more refugees.
That's right.
They're getting money to soften the hearts of resistance to American Christians to more Islamic proliferation. And so in reality, these guys are getting money to work both sides of this issue, to soften up the church, help the church then be commissioned as volunteers to roll out the welcome wagon. And see, that's what we see with guys like
George Soros.
Yeah, with George Soros.
Evangelical Immigration Roundtable.
Exactly.
Which has got Matt Chandler people, and you've got Russell Moore, the Ethics Religious Liberty Commission.
Russell
Southern
Moore,
Baptist.
Michael Ware just spoke at the Evangelical Roundtable with the Trinity Forum at the National Immigration Forum. They just spoke together on the stage, pushing for more immigration reform, care for refugees. So there's a payday for those who are involved in this, these international aid organizations. And then, of course, long term, the church, like for instance with the Southern Baptists, you have the International Mission Board working internationally with this. You have the North American Mission Board and World Relief working directly with the present Southern Baptist president, J.D. Greer, who trained over 300 people in his own church to welcome the Muslim refugees into his community and connect them to social services. So we're loading them up with taxpayer dollars after we're watching our people get taken into this whole idea that this is effectively some way to ensure civil society. And again, it's not even holding up to the flimsy assertion that this could be an evangelistic effort, because the evangelism is forbidden. Proselytization is forbidden.
You won't get the funding.
And you won't get the funding, yeah.
In fact, we know from our documovie Sabotage that Matt Chandler's church has been involved in pushing international rescue mission.
Right.
The International Rescue Committee. This is a guy over from Great Britain who's connected to the Labour Party, who works with Tony Blair. He worked for Tony Blair. He was up to be the head of the Labour Party, and he lost David Miliband. He lost to his brother, Ed Miliband. But he runs the International Rescue Committee, which Matt Chandler's church is promoting. This is a guy that was tied directly to Hillary Clinton as well as Tony Blair. Tony Blair, who signed the Common Word document, says Muslims and Christians worship the same God. So we've got all these neo-Calvinists from the Gospel Coalition and the Southern Baptists and other groups involved in this. By the way, look again at this screen. Here's this young guy from Moody Bible who's on staff with them, who's the co-director. Then look at this. I researched his name and found that he's got an article published over at Sojourners. This is the website of Jim Wallace. Jim Wallace has been positive pro-communist Marxist guy and promoting pretty much and agreeing with every Marxist revolution in Central and South America for decades. We have him on audio in our brand new documentary, Siege, at siegethemovie.com. We have Jim Wallace on audio calling evangelical Christians who back conservative Christian policies like vetting people and national sovereignty and borders. He calls them demons. And so yet here is the guy who works at Moody Bible Institute, who's the co-director of Neighborly Faith, got an article over at Sojourners. The headline, Young Evangelicals Are Rejecting the Islamophobia of Their Elders. And of course, Islamophobia, again, created by the Muslim Brotherhood group, the International Institute of Islamic Thought, to try to portray anyone that speaks truth about Islam as being crazy. We also see that he says that Pastor Bob Roberts Jr. is involved. A Southern Baptist megachurch in Texas is what he runs. And he, of course, he put together many events introducing imams and evangelical pastors together. Bob Roberts has been pushing the Common Word document out of Yale that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. That's a lie. They serve Satan. Is not the God of the Bible. And they would even tell you that if they're being honest, because they don't believe that God would have a son, send him to earth to die and be resurrected. He's not a personal God. But they'll tell you that and lie to your face because they can do that under taqiyya. So even Muslims don't believe that Muslims and Christians worship the same God, but they'll tell you that in order to deceive Christians, and that's exactly what's happening. Here is someone else that's speaking for the Neighborly Faith. I don't know how you say the name correctly. Zainab Chaudhry, but notice what it says there. She's part of the Council on American Islamic Relations. That's CARE. Well, that was a group founded in 1994 by, according to our own federal government and the Holy Land Foundation trial and other government documents, CARE, founded in 1994 by the leaders of Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928 by Albana. One of their other leaders was a guy named al-Husseini. According to the Nuremberg trials, he worked with Adolf Hitler. He was an architect, along with the Nazis, of the final solution and the slaughter of 5 million non-Jews, 6 million Jews. Al-Husseini, Muslim Brotherhood, started in 1928. In 1987, they started their terrorist organization, Hamas. In 1994, they started their civil rights group to be the face in America, CARE, Council on Islamic Relations. So really, when you hear CARE, you should be thinking Muslim Brotherhood, Holocaust, and Hamas. And yet here she's part of this, coming to your Christian colleges and universities. Notice he's wearing the hijab, which is a sign of Sharia. She's under Sharia, and the American flag. So they're trying to send a message that these two can coexist. No, they cannot.
Well, it's carefully crafted optics, and that's something that Christians have to realize, how manipulative this really is. You get that picture blending the two together, that beautiful American flag waving in the background. So clearly this is manipulation of the basest sort, and the imagery is very important here.
Yes, it is. Here's another one, Della Magadi, or however you say her name. Look, she's the director of research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. So I looked her up, and I found at Discover the Networks, it wrote this. In a 2007 interview on Link Television, Magadid, or however you say her name, was asked to comment on the harsh punishment like stoning, canings, and dismemberment associated with Sharia. She replied that Muslims generally tend to view Sharia as a framework for achieving, quote, a more just society, protection of human rights, and rule of law, end quote. Wow. Wow, Tom. I mean, that's just a bold-faced lie.
Yeah, that's a stretch.
That's not what Sharia is.
No, and you have a lot of people on your regular programming who can tell you who've lived under these regimes.
Yeah, like Annie Cyrus, who's featured heavily in our documovie Siege at siegethemovie.com, who was thrown into Sharia jail because as a young child she was skipping and singing on the streets of Iran. Her hair was coming out from underneath her hijab. Or she was found in a cab with a man who was the driver, and she got caned for that because that's you can't be with a man by yourself in a cab like that. So she can tell you all about Sharia. Discover the Networks goes on to say about this lady who worked with Obama's administration, by the way, who's presenting on evangelical Christian colleges and universities. Discover the Network says of her, in May of 2009, she spoke at the 34th Annual Conference of the Islamic Council of North America. The event was co-sponsored by the Muslim American Society, which was founded to serve as the Muslim Brotherhood's formal American franchise. Again, you hear Muslim Brotherhood, think Holocaust. They worked with Hitler. In July 4th, look at that, 4th of July, 2009, she gave a speech to the Islamic Society of North America, and she depicted supporters of violent jihad as people who crave freedom and democracy, but, quote, believe more than do the mainstream that their society, their faith, and their way of life is threatened, militarily threatened, in some ways even culturally threatened by the West, end quote. Quote, they're more likely to believe that there is a war against their faith. They are also more likely to say that moving toward greater democracy will help Muslims progress, end quote. They're not interested in any kind of democratic system. Sharia Sharia is tyranny. And of course, here she basically is saying, look, the jihadists, they feel like they're under threat, their culture, their way of life. Sounds like to me she's justifying jihad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when essentially this is a destructive force that we've already seen what it's like when it's unleashed on America. We know that we're the great Satan. I mean, Christians, we need to wake up. We need to reread history, world history, look at what happened and almost happened to all of Europe. And so it's the same enemy with the same ideology, just a little bit nicer dress, and it's terrorism dressed in drag, basically. And so we're being told that this is compatible with Christian education because this is being done as a campus outreach, a campus-focused, student-led ministry all over. You were talking about Matt Chandler, actually one of the co-founders of this neighborly faith that this woman and these jihadists are working in. His home church is a Matt Chandler Acts 29 church.
So Matt Chandler plants churches through what's called Acts 29,
yes.
And the person involved in this goes to one of those Acts 29 churches.
Yes.
And we warn you about Matt Chandler in Marxianity. I mean, the same characters keep coming up, whether it's dealing with AND campaign or now Neighborly Faith. Notice the Gospel Coalition and these neo-Calvinists and neo-evangelicals. The same groups and names keep coming up, don't they?
Right. And this guy, Bob Roberts, of course, Northwood Church in Texas, he's considered a very successful Southern Baptist megachurch pastor. This guy's celebrated as cutting edge on the forefront of interfaith dialogue, Christian Islamic dialogue. He actually has worship services together where they bring the children of the Christians and the Muslims on stage together, and they perform and sing songs together. And of course, I know you've had some guests who have really gone into this guy's work, but why the Southern Baptists would allow this to go on by one of their megachurch pastors and deceive and manipulate a generation of Christians. And then, of course, he shows up here at Wheaton, and he's one of the mobilizers and mentors of this very group.
Absolutely. And Phil Haney has said at this news desk, former Department of Homeland Security officer Phil Haney has said at this news desk and done several programs on Bob Roberts and his Alliance of Virtue, which is an international organization of interfaith dialogue with some of the biggest jihadi groups and organizations and countries in the world. And Bob Roberts is right there in the thick of it. So this Discover the Networks goes on to say about this gal that's involved in Neighborly Faith, visiting your Christian colleges and universities. In early October 2009, she was interviewed on a British television program hosted by a member of the Hizb ut-Tahrir party, I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly, which seeks to facilitate the creation of a worldwide Islamic state governed by Sharia law. When other guests were promoting it, she did not knock it down. She didn't push back at all. She's apparently for Sharia, and that would be evident by the fact she wears the hijab. Here is Shadi Hamid. He is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Of course, we know they were heavily involved in planting the United Nations. We go to Jihad Watch. We find this headline: Georgetown University panel shows how Islamic State's caliphate has justification in Islamic history and appeal for modern Muslims. And it says that Shadi Hamid of the Qatar-funded Brookings Institute, a former student of one of the guys that was recently being talked about in the article, continued this analysis, stating that there is, quote, something powerful about the idea, end quote, of a caliphate for, quote, the vast majority of Muslims, even those who are quite secular, end quote. So a guy speaking for Neighborly Faith on Christian colleges and universities is stating that the idea of a caliphate is a pretty good idea. Well, what will a caliphate mean to the Christians and churches in those countries?
Death, I think. It's obvious that they're not going to be tolerant of Christians like they're asking us to be tolerant of them, and they're certainly not going to allow for any type of evangelism or proselytization. It's not going to happen.
Any Protestant Bible-teaching churches in Saudi Arabia?
Not that I know of. The ones who are like we've seen with some of the Gospel Coalition churches that are in some of these Muslim strongholds, actually are not ministering to the Muslim population at all because they can't. Like the Qatar, there's a Gospel Coalition church there, and they're ministering to the Filipino population who are part of the service industry. But of course, the optics look like, oh, they're letting us plant evangelical churches in these countries and evangelize. No, they're absolutely not.
It's the same way in China that you have some churches that are allowed, but those churches are for the internationals who are there working.
Right.
They will not let the Chinese people go into those churches.
Right.
We know this firsthand from people on the ground.
So, I mean, it's not that you don't want to reach those people who are in the service industry, you know, these providers. the internationals, but in reality, it's a fake sleight of hand, basically, to make it appear that these Muslim countries are open to the church planting and to reaching their people when American missions organizations come in. One of the other ironies here within the whole interfaith dialogue is that we're watching this happen, not only taking down these institutions like Wheaton and Moody, but it's also happening and proliferating among the campus ministry. So even if your child is, I hate to say child, but your young adult child is in a secular university, but they're part of Cru or InterVarsity or Navigators as campus ministries, these organizations are involved as well. So Neighborly Faith is quickly making its way as a youth-led movement deep into the heart of evangelicalism and into our institutions, and then major ministries. And of course, all these are social justice driven. And I can tell you that the justice narrative is what this is ultimately wrapped in for the hearts and minds of these young people, that it's unjust to be Islamophobic and to not allow these people to worship their God and not to get to know them and establish friendships and so forth with them. So there's a lot of heart tugging, and manipulation in this. And of course, for young people who want to change the world and they love being involved in something that has an international flavor. I mean, I remember this when I was working in New York City. I could stand in a circle of 20 people and I would sometimes be the only American there, only person born and bred in America. And so that was intriguing to me as a young man, but at the same time, I wasn't looking across the spectrum at various religions. We were all Christians worshiping the same God, going to the same church, and seeing the same testimony written in our hearts, and loving the same word. And the problem with this interfaith dialogue is it erases all those boundaries, and it promotes that universalist ideology as really the spirituality of the future.
Absolutely. It's hijacking the American church, as we've been pointing out, to destroy our own country by our own hands, as the Muslim Brotherhood explanatorium said they would do. And reality is, as I've stated over and over, and I will continue to state, modern day evangelicalism has become one of the greatest spiritual and national security threats to America. I never thought I really would have to come to this point this fast. It's happened faster than I expected, but the evangelical church in America is becoming one of the greatest threats spiritually and on a national security level to America by giving credibility to this.
Yeah, that's sad to say. And it's being done by the people who should be the wisest to this kind of tactics. And we should be the people who are defending the Constitution. We should be the people who are standing up for our constitutional republic and understanding what these freedoms mean to the world. And really, as America goes, so goes the world.
Absolutely.
And if we're the last barrier to these things taking over Western society, then that's not going to bode well for the world.
No, it's
or
not.
For anyone in it.
Over at the Jihad Watch, we read that Mr. Hamid, who speaks for the Interfaith Dialogue Group Neighborly Faith, Hamid describes the Muslim Brotherhood as one of the, quote, deeply liberal, end quote, yet, quote, mainstream Islamist movements committed to the democratic process, end quote. No, they're not. They're Muslim Brotherhood. They're committed to Sharia, and they're not mainstream. These are radicals that go all the way back to Adolf Hitler. Go read the Nuremberg trials. Watch our documovie Sabotage at sabotagethemovie.com. Watch the 1-hour trailer for free. You'll see all about Muslim Brotherhood and see their leader, al-Husseini, with Hitler. Sabotagethemovie.com. Well, here's the website, Neighborly Faith, and here is a guy that's involved, that's worked with Rick Warren a lot. We've talked about him a lot, Abu Batel, and he's with Interfaith Youth Corps. And look at that. Also with Neighborly Faith, Daniel Darling, Southern Baptist Convention's Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Well, that's run by Russell Moore, who's the boy of Al Mohler. Al Mohler, who I write about a lot in Marxianity, who will speak out of both sides of his mouth, say things on radio, on his little radio show, and some of my friends will say, oh, he's so orthodox and conservative and right on. I'm like, yeah, and you're being a fool and you're falling for it, because he says on radio what the older folks want to hear so you can get some of that money, I think. And then he runs over and is doing all kinds of progressive things over in the tall grass. The issue is what's happening in the tall grass, and most of you are not seeing what's happening in the tall grass, and that's why I have to write books like Marxianity, produce things like Sabotage and Siege, and bring you shows like this with Tom Littleton. And he has to write the stuff he writes at his website, 30piecesofsilver.org. And on his website, he'll show you what's happening in the tall grass that a lot of you aren't paying attention to. But Al Mohler will do all his nice little song and dance over here on his radio show, convince you he's really conservative, and while you're watching and distracted by this, he's running over here and creating, I believe, little disciples like Russell Moore of the Ethics Religious Liberty Commission, who's redefining the family, pushing LGBTQ and all kinds of social justice, ecumenical stuff, and got his own boy, Daniel Darling, right there at Interfaith Neighborly. Am I right or wrong?
Right, and here's Daniel Darling's endorsement of the neighborly faith. He says, "We cannot obey Jesus if we spread false ideas about our Muslim neighbors, or if we fail to love them well." That's one of their favorite phrases, which I really get tired of hearing. That's why I appreciate the work of Neighborly Faith that helps believers understand the Muslim community and equips them with tools to help them fulfill the mission of God. That's Daniel Darling of the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission. Now, I've met a lot of these guys. I see them at the Southern Baptist Convention, and they always cringe when I come around because I've made my way to their boss a couple of times, and
they know who you are.
They know who I am, and I've forced some uncomfortable questions on him, but he never answers them. He's notorious for ignoring his constituency, the people who pay him. But the fact is that promoting this interfaith dialogue right out of the heart of the Southern Baptist ethics office is about as absurd as it could possibly be. And so here's Daniel Darling. He's speaking at their events. He's part of the leadership for this. So this doesn't bode well for Southern Baptists. If you think that this is something you could be indifferent about, you've got to realize that as a Southern Baptist, your missions offerings are paying this guy's salary. You are paying him to deceive your children on Christian college campuses that you trust.
And this is the baloney of the cooperative program, because when you throw money in the offering plate, a percent goes back to the Nashville headquarters, what I call the Protestant Vatican, the Nashville headquarters of the Southern Baptist Convention, funding this kind of trash. And what's so ironic is that, as you say, it's coming out of the Ethics Religious Liberty Commission's Daniel Darling is part of this, as we saw from the screenshot, and he works for Russell Moore, and yet Al Mohler had Russell Moore on his campus for years and years and years and spoke at Russell Moore's inauguration, and Al Mohler declared that Russell Moore was the man from Issachar. Remember what it says about in Issachar? The men of Issachar were considered wise because they understood the times and knew what God would have them to do. Al Mohler says that Russell Moore is a man from Issachar. Really? He understands the times and knows what God would have us do? So God would have us violate 2 Corinthians 6, 14 through 17 or 18, Romans 16, 17, Ephesians 5, 11. I mean, this is just really bad. But Darling is also with the Gospel Coalition. Shocker, right. He's with the Gospel Coalition. Common theme here. Well, as you said, here are the conveners. Wheaton College, InterVarsity are just some of them involved. Now let's go to who else is involved. We see Mindy here. She's with Cru, that's old Campus Crusade. We see Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. We see Interfaith Youth Corps. We see InterVarsity again. We see that InterVarsity again. We see Luke Goodrich, Beckett Religious Liberty Law Firm. Well, Beckett Religious Liberty. Oh, they're for religious liberty, Tom. They must be good guys. What are they doing?
Well, they're for redefining religious liberty through the lens of pro-Islamic policy. This Beckett firm and Luke Goodwin in particular, he's one of the big advocates for the right to build mosques, to expand the network of mosques. If you want to have more Muslims in your neighborhood, allow them to build an Islamic center or a mosque, because that's going to become the hub. And interestingly, only 18 states have really seen this massive resettlement campaign. So this may seem like it's foreign to most people. They're not seeing it happen in their area. But for those 18 states who were chosen by the Obama administration for all of this refugee resettlement, they're seeing this happen, and the building of mosques is key to that. This guy with Beckett Law Firm, who's actually speaking at the event, he wraps the narrative in social justice. He said it's the right thing to do to advocate for more mosques to be built and for Islamic rights. He also advocates for Islamic centers, cultural centers, and educational.
And what's
centers.
going on at those Islamic cultural centers and education?
Well, they're recruiting, yes, and they're indoctrinating people,
brainwashing people.
So the problem is, to allow this stuff to continue to grow on our own shores, we're actually selling our own children's future.
We're doing what the Muslim Brotherhood said, destroying our own miserable house by our own hand.
But to imagine that we have we now see there are major evangelical partners enabling this, enabling it.
And you know what's so interesting is that they want to say that by helping the Muslims build their mosques, which is not just a house of worship for them, it's the center and the seat of government and Sharia and adjudication and armament. And I mean, you go over and see how they've closed down over 100 mosques in France due to all the military-grade weapons they were finding. I mean, we've done all kinds of stuff on this. But what's so interesting is the masking terms they use to say that if you're for liberty, then you need to help the Muslims build mosques so they can train more jihadis. And if you're for evangelism, you'll be for interfaith dialogue. So they take everything that is evil and the very antithesis of Christianity, and they label it as something liberty or freedom, or advancing liberty and freedom, or securing liberty and freedom by helping Muslims build mosques, or evangelism by being involved in interfaith dialogue. And it's all the exact opposite.
Right. And is Islam against the establishment of a state religion? No. They want to be the state religion.
They won't allow for any other state religion. That's Sharia.
Right. And so here's the problem. Christians are watching this shell game happen right in front of them, and they're trying to follow the leader under this emotional narrative, and they're being completely suckered and fooled and taken in.
Look at this one. There's another guy that's involved right off the website of Neighborly Faith. Anwar Khan, he's the president of Islamic Relief USA. Well, look what I found when I went researching on that. Here's from the Clarion Project, article written by Ryan Maru. He said Obama administration dropped huge terror funding case. All right, this is written December 2nd, 2018, almost a year to the day from where we're sitting right now. He says, in 2014, I was involved in triggering a federal investigation into Islamic Relief, one of the world's largest Islamic charities. A criminal case was presented by 3 government agencies, whereupon the Obama administration's Justice Department astounded the agents involved by declining to prosecute. It's time for Congress to demand answers. A federal special agent with years of counterterrorism experience noticed my published research into the Islamic Relief charity and asked me to meet with him in 2014. As I walked him through a trove of documents, he was taken aback. Islamic Relief, a powerful global charity, had extensive ties to Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and other extremist groups, while receiving federal grants and federal employee donations. The charity was embraced by both political parties. It even enjoyed close working relationships with the State Department and U.S. Agency for International Development. This raised questions about the government's vetting process and the influence of Islamic Relief and similar groups on U.S. counterterrorism policy. It became clear to the agent that an investigation of Islamic Relief would likely implicate a range of other powerful organizations. I provided information on 8 additional groups that could be subject to a broader investigation. The agent was alarmed by the gravity of the situation. He, nor anyone he knew of, had been briefed about this multi-layered Islamic network in America. As a result of my research and briefings, an investigation was triggered. The FBI, IRS, and Office of Personnel Management opened investigations into Islamic Relief and its various arms. Islamic Relief USA's acceptance onto the Combined Federal Campaign Charity List, which allows federal employees to automatically donate to approved nonprofits, also drew federal scrutiny. The case was potentially bigger than the one against the Holy Land Foundation. And folks, that was big. The largest terrorism financing case in American history. That was what the Holy Land Foundation was. The largest terrorism funding or financing case in American history. And this could have been bigger. And if prosecutions occurred, there would likely be a domino effect impacting many other Islamist organizations in America and around the world. Then, near the end of the Obama administration in 2016, the Justice Department declined to prosecute. And yet, my friends, who's involved? That's right. The group he's talking about, their president, Islamic Relief USA, is involved in going onto your college campuses and universities that are Christian to do interfaith dialogue, which again, according to the Islamic scholar Syed Qutb of Muslim Brotherhood, it's a one-way bridge to bring the non-Muslim to their side, not the other way around. Bottom line is, folks, they're trying to convert your kids to Islam, and the stupid Americans don't realize they're being played as useful idiots and fools. Well, also, who's involved in this? This guy, Cody, who is with the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. That would be Danny Akin's group, who also works with Gospel Coalition, correct?
Right.
Then we see Bob Roberts. Bob Roberts, of course, has been involved in pretty much every interfaith dialogue group. That is a major problem as well. We've discussed in other programs. Bethany Jenkins is involved. She's a contributor at the Gospel Coalition. So, Tom, we see a lot of groups involved that go back to other organizations that we have warned about.
Right. And that's the thing. Every one of these manifestations that are so problematic, you don't have to go very far, get into the background and the supporters of this stuff, and you find the Gospel Coalition virtually everywhere. You find many Gospel Coalition leaders here. You find these disciples of these, the guys like Al Mohler, Tim Keller, and others that we keep warning you about. We find people deeply in the denominational structures of very conservative evangelical denominations, including the Southern Baptist and the Presbyterian Church in America. I want to read something here that's pretty ironic that they're bold enough to say it. Near the end of it, of this report that I put together on it, it says their vision or their mission is to foster the development of the Muslim community, interfaith relations, and civic engagement and better understanding of Islam. In fact, they drop down in the box below it says it is a multi-faith collaboration for social transformation.
So for social transformation, okay, there you go. They're going to use Islam for social transformation. They're going to get Islam to destroy everything. That's why the Marxists are allowing the Muslims to do this. As we reveal in the documovie Siege, the father of fallen Navy SEAL Team 6 member Billy Vaughn says the Islamists would not be making the headway they are today if it wasn't for the Marxists that allowed this to happen.
Right.
Chris Gobbets, who infiltrated CARE undercover, says the same thing. It is the Marxists that are using the Islamists to destroy the country and to do what? What's the line they used?
Multi-faith collaboration for social transformation.
Social transformation, the fundamental transformation of America. And one of the ways they're doing it is through interfaith dialogue and getting your kids to buy into, Islam and Sharia, which will destroy our constitutional republic. So they're using the Islamists, as I've always said for years, as junkyard dogs to do their destruction. Now, what's also very interesting is that they say they're going to explain Islam to them. You really think they're going to explain Islam like former Muslim Sharam Hadian would, or Annie Cyrus, or Islamic expert and Arabic-speaking expert on the Quran, Usama Dakduk would? No, they would never let someone like that come in. If they want these kids to understand Islam, why don't they bring in former Muslims who are now Christians to these Christian colleges and universities? Because they would not allow them to speak the truth, for that would be, under their definition, Islamophobia.
Right.
Now, if this isn't brainwashing, I don't know what is. Look at this. Tom, again, writes about this at 30piecesofsilver.org. What they did is they did a survey of these kids before they had the Neighborly Faith event on the Christian college or university campus, right?
Right. Yeah, this was November 1st. This is
November
very
1st
recent, November 1st.
Of 2019.
At Wheaton. Yes,
Okay.
at Wheaton College.
And what did they find before the event?
Well, they measured different things about, especially for the conservative evangelical students. They were concerned about their attitudes toward Islam, and it says that after the report, they said that 88% were more sympathetic to Muslim hardships in America. 77% were more interested in studying Islam. That's three-quarters, more than three-quarters. 75% were more concerned about how my church is treating Muslims. They're being encouraged, of course, to meet Muslims and spend time with them. And then he says 82% were more likely to participate in Christian-Muslim event like they had just...
Dialogue.
Yeah, interfaith dialogue. And he goes on to say, among conservative evangelical students, a post-conference survey showed that while 49% had neutral or somewhat negative attitudes toward Muslims before the conference, only 6% remained neutral and 0% maintained negative attitudes after the conference.
So what's that showing is that the brainwashing worked.
Yes,
it
works.
flipped them. And brainwashing or propaganda is all about influence. It's all about influence, nudging them, pushing them. Mm-hmm. And so they were pushed and they were nudged and they were influenced to now deny what they knew to be true about Islam after being raised as a generation that saw the video footage of 9/11 over and over and over. And now they're embracing Islam. Now they don't have any fear of Islam. And isn't that how you defeat a nation? You get the enemy to get inside and you embrace the enemy. The enemy doesn't have to defeat you. You willingly surrender to the enemy. And that's exactly what's happening. And who's helping them do it? The useful idiots in evangelicalism and in our Christian colleges and universities, and many of them institutions we never thought would go down this road. Now, in our series on brainwashing, we did a whole TV series on it. What did we learn? One of the things we learned is that not too long ago, a study was done on putting up a lady that was described as a Christian, evangelical, who was pushing the concept of man-made global warming as an apocalyptic event. Man-made global warming as a very, very dangerous apocalyptic event. And when this woman who's an expert was put up in front of Christian young people on Christian colleges and Christian university campuses, what happened? The same thing we're seeing with Islam. The students went from denying global climate change as a man-made global warming apocalyptic event, denying it, to now believing it was a serious problem. And what did the study they did show? It showed that you don't have to put up a Christian to these Christian kids. All you got to do is put up an expert, as long as the expert is endorsed by the Christian leadership of the Christian college, the Christian university, or your church. Bottom line, if your church leaders endorse it and put them up, the people under their leadership will embrace it. So you just use the experts to give validity to the propaganda and the lie, and the sheep will buy it. That's a tactic of brainwashing, and we now see whether it's interfaith dialogue in Islam and believing the lies about Islam versus the truth about Islam and what they're really all about, or the lie of a global warming apocalyptic event. You use the same tactic. Christian leaders who are trusted put up the experts, and if those experts are put up there by those Christian leaders, pastors, Christian college presidents, university presidents, the young people, the congregation will buy it.
Right.
That's how you brainwash. One of the tactics, one of the 10 tactics I've come up with.
And we're seeing this in my area around Birmingham, Alabama. I mean, you're talking about the heart of the Bible Belt and the epicenter of Southern Baptist life, and we're seeing this interfaith dialogue actually brought right into the churches through apologetics ministries. We had apologetics ministry bring in a guy from D.C. Into two very conservative churches about 3 years ago, and he said, that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. Of course, he was introduced by the pastor. He was endorsed, and then this guy was not a cleric. He was just an activist. Actually, runs a lobby group in D.C. Lobbying for more pro-Muslim ideology and legislation. But he said that Sharia was compatible with the Constitution, which is a lie. And he said that Christians need to address the issue because it is a social justice issue. And then, of course, he said that the Islamists would be tolerant of religious freedom, and so that Americans could embrace Islam without any conflict whatsoever. And to imagine that an apologetics ministry was presenting this as something that would be helpful and meaningful to several churches in our area, I was astounded. I actually contacted the people who are involved with this ministry and on the board of this ministry, and I was threatened. And it doesn't go over very well when you confront this kind of stuff, but the realities are unchanging here. And so to see American Christians welcoming this stuff not only on our shores, but into our doors, the doors of our churches and the doors of our institutions, we're in a very perilous place when we can be propagandized so easily and let people lie to our faces and lie to our children and destroy life as we know it.
Absolutely. And if you think that Islam is going to allow for America to continue as a constitutional republic with our liberties and freedoms, go look and see what they did to Egypt. It was once a Coptic Christian nation. Look at what they did to Iran. Look at what they're doing to Turkey. Wherever they go, they treat women horribly, deprive people of liberties and freedoms, are horrible to the Christians and the Jews, and do not allow for liberty or freedom of Christian freedom of speech or worship or public assembly of Christians and conservatives and Jews. So we have the world history of the nations they've taken over to show what it is they want to do here, and you cannot mix these two worldviews and think you're going to maintain liberty and freedom in America. And again, where's it coming from? Christian colleges and universities and institutions. Sadly, once again, evangelicalism is becoming one of the greatest spiritual and national security threats to America as they build a false, dominant church, as predicted in Revelation chapter 17, verse 1. Well, Tom's website is 30piecesofsilver.org, 30piecesofsilver.org. Tom, thanks for being with us again.
Thank you, Brandon.
Folks, if you appreciate this broadcast, we are listener supported. The way we bring it to you with all the cost of cameras, production, streaming, $3,000 a month just in streaming and storage costs, not to mention all the computer techs we have to hire and pay. All of that costs money, and you can support us in one of two ways as a listener-supported network. Tax-deductible contribution to WVW-Foundation.com, WVW-Foundation.com. You'll find our mailing address there as well as on the screen. You can also call our number if you prefer to give over the phone. You'll find our mailing address at WVW-Foundation.com. It is tax-deductible. We are listener-supported. Without you, we will not be able to continue. The other way you can support us is by joining the Situation Room, where we archive years and years of radio shows, TV shows, ebooks, documentaries, and more. SituationRoom.net. You can join at a monthly rate, yearly rate, 2-year rate, or save more and join at a 3-year rate. SituationRoom.net. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for grabbing the URL of this program, tweeting it, Facebooking it, however you do it on social media. Direct your family and friends. Text it to people. Get this information far and wide. The antidote for brainwashing is truth. That's historically proven, factual. You want to refute brainwashing? Truth overthrows the lies every time. So send out the URL of this program, won't you? Till next time, I'm Brandon Howse. Thanks for watching. Take care.